Hello, hello. It has been a while. It's been more than a while actually, since I have, excuse me, been live on LinkedIn. It feels good to be back. It feels crazy to be back in a way. I was having a look before I decided to do this show, and this is going to be a weekly show. So, welcome to Embedding Gender Equity. Today is our first show. So you're joining me alone for the first time. I'm Leanne Meyer, your host, and I'll talk a little bit more about me. But anyone who's joined so far, thank you for joining. As it says at the bottom, feel free to say hello. This makes everything so much more fun for me. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Leanne Meyer. I am founder and CEO of Benefactum Consulting. I'm also the founder of a social enterprise called The Sororum. I'm an author. My book will be coming to the market later on this year. What else? I'm a wife, I'm a mom, and pretty much everything that I do is around gender equity. Gender equity is actually, not even actually, is the heart of everything I do, from social enterprise to consultancy to how I live my life to the topic of my book. Um, Gender equity is at the heart of everything. And today's show is a little bit about, well, it's about a few things. One, I wanted to just to add context to the show, how I use the phrase gender equity. Two, there are some announcements to come that I'm very excited about. Three, there are obviously some topics that I wanted to cover. And then going forward, you will find me and a guest talking about the various different ways and bringing their approaches to gender equity, be it VC, be it sustainability in IT. So many of these different topics that are critical to us making progress, critical to us building a just society, critical to us building just corporations. Because ultimately, I say this all the time, and those of you who have seen any of my videos before know I always say corporations are purely a reflection of society. So if we get a just society, we should have just organizations, just corporates, and vice versa. I've seen my first comment. Thank you, thank you. This is the summer look. And it's really interesting. I'm gonna give this 2 minutes of a topic. um I love big earrings, thus these. And they always feel, when I wear them, aside from the fact that I enjoy wearing big earrings, they always feel like a mark of rebellion. I always felt like I could never wear them when I was in the corporate space. Whereas now I'm like, oh, I can wear my big earrings. Anyway, back to the show at hand. Um, Gender equity. Now, everybody uses gender equity in different ways, but how I use it to be very, very specific is gender equity to me represents the nexus of, and you can call it also intersectionality, race and gender. So a lot of the times we look at, and I'll talk about this a little more as we go through the show, but gender equality is ultimately getting parity to men, but we're still not looking at what parity amongst women looks like. So, how do you get to that point? It's by adding this intersectional lens and comparing it to the experiences of the group of women who, for the most part, have it the worst in the office or in the workplace, full stop, which is Black women. So, how can we then take the experiences, knowledge of Black women as organizations and use this to build gender equity strategies? And that's how I use the phrase. And it's really interesting. And this leads nicely onto my first point. But you see, today, the difference is this: I'm coming with statistics, I'm making sure I'm prepared for today's show. Um, so, a lot of you may or may not know, and I will share links afterwards. My organization has focused on the experience of Black women across Europe for the past 2 years. So, it's called the Closing the Chasm Survey, which then leads to the Experience Chasm results. And each year, the first year, the theme was very, very specific. And out of that theme was Black women have categorically said that DEI initiatives are not working for them. What is missing is specificity. Now, one of the reasons why I did or created the Experience Chasm Survey at that point was multifunctional. One, because I felt that the voice of Black women was overwhelmingly US centric. And two, and this relates to the second part or the third bit where I'm going with this. Two was that, McKinsey is respected. They have amazing data, which I'll be referencing shortly. But I felt personally disappointed that despite them recording the experiences of Black women within the workplace and women of color, we were still at the same point of it's not getting better. And my question at that point was twofold. Are the wrong questions being asked? And why is it not getting better? And that was really the narrative and the push behind the Experience Chasm survey, which was I wanted different questions to be asked. I wanted it to be solutions focused. I wanted it to be taking out of this kind of subjective part of this is how we feel, but rather this is what we need. Closing the chasm is establishing what the issues are and how can we close them. And at the time, there hadn't been that same level of specificity around from a big organization. So, McKinsey had a lot of things around women, and they had their underpart or their sub research that was looking at Black women and women of color in general. But now this is the interesting part. So I saw this article first, or I saw this piece of research first before I realized that McKinsey has an Institute of Black Economic Mobility. I think that's Black Economic Mobility, if I'm not mistaken. I will also share the link later. But they've also come to the same conclusion. And I think this is a very, very exciting part. The fact that McKinsey has come to the same conclusion as we came to in the Experience Chasm survey, that specificity is required, is going to be a game changer. And the reason why it's going to be an industry game changer, and this is irrespective of which industry they work in, is because they are explicitly, they're credible, they're large, and they have a huge reach. And they are being very clear that organizations need to be specific. But they've come up with a new categorization, which is BBP, Black, Bangladeshi, Pakistani. And what they've said is what we said as an outset around the Experience Chasm survey, which is you can't take like for like. You cannot say that the experiences are the same. And they've basically extrapolated loads of data that says Black women, Bangladeshi women, and Pakistani women have the most closely, not the same, but the most closely aligned experiences in the workplace, in society. And they really took a look at that. So, they even kind of, and I have to say, this data is amazing, looking at organizations. They had 132 organizations, I do believe, looked at their progress in terms of increased representation in leadership. And out of that, they kind of calculated and distilled it down to only 17% of these organizations had managed to increase the amount of women in leadership and also ensure that there was a higher representation of Black, Bangladeshi, and Pakistani women. So as we see, there's movement, but there's not enough movement. It's still not flowing down, definitely not trickling down, kind of. But this is a really big shift. This is a really big shift in terms of really recognizing, acknowledging that gender equity, once again, flattening this hierarchy, is going to be crucial. One of the other things that I really did like as well, and I'm just looking at this, at my notes in terms of data, a lot of the times it's been positioned around, and this is why McKinsey statistics are fantastic. It's been positioned around, we are going to pay people more money. But what they came to, which I think is brilliant, is they said, if organizations in the UK, because this is a UK specific report and research, if UK organizations close two things, both the ethnicity pay gap and the gender pay gap, it would lead to around 30% increase in the income of these women from the BBP category. 30%. 30%, that's huge. But they took it a step further, and this is really the point. They looked at it from the impact on society, the impact on the economy. And this always has to be the focus of gender equity. It's always above and beyond the individual woman. It's how does it affect her community? If we look at women's spending habits and the fact that women tend to invest a high proportion of their salaries or their disposable income into community efforts, into education, into all of these communal benefits. This 30% isn't just about this one woman. And I bring it back to what I call the circle of money. A woman's ability to earn money is the same as her ability to save and her ability to invest. All of it matters. All of it matters. So I think, like, for me, this was one of like the biggest takeaways. And if you have the time, I can only emphasize to read it. I might not necessarily agree on their solutions completely, but the fact that the first one that they suggested is being very specific. I don't have to agree with all of them. I think it's just phenomenal that this topic is coming to the forefront. I think it's phenomenal that more and more awareness is being paid to the topic without it. And I'm not saying it's going to be without its issues, but it's a really, really strong signal when an organization such as McKinsey decides to kind of put their stake in the ground and also really talk about intersectional, the need for intersectional work within the workplace. Now, coming back for 2 seconds, I have been very clear this week on my opinion of gender pay gap reporting, not least because there are compulsory or mandatory pieces of information that needs to be shared, which is the data. But the meaty bit isn't within the narrative. And one of the, I made a video today which was looking at, and this is just kind of on an individual level, as women, one of the things we need to think about, it's not so much when we're going for jobs, it's not so much around does the organization report, but it's another thing you need to think about, right? What is their pay gap and how does that impact me? Because whilst you might be earning market rate, if you're still earning 30% for doing the same job as a man, it's a problem. It's a problem. So it's just all of these things come together, our ability to do and show up as we should be able to, in terms of financially and being valued, because this is all about it, it's about impact and also about value recognition. Am I being paid? And when I say what you're worth, it's not in terms of your actual value, but rather, are you being paid what you're worth in comparison to what men are being paid for the same job in the same organization? And thinking even more, I would say, around the gender pay gap reporting, the setup is slightly different in the US. And when I was also looking at some statistics there, they were saying, of the organizations that should report, it's a little bit more complicated because it's like reports, discloses or doesn't disclose whether they're even tracking this information. It's a little bit more complicated, but in the end, there's still less presence. But once again, it's this part around we cannot allow the lack of data to stop us from trying to create impact, trying to create change. Not everything will be tracked, but it still doesn't mean it doesn't have an impact somewhere. And I think looking even at this McKinsey reporting and it kind of really breaking it down to, individual, it might be helping someone individually, but the further impact that it can create, this is what we have to think about. This is what organizations have to think about. It's not just the power of one, it's the power of so many others and the power to help and change. Internally, it might be that part around, an individual earning more money, but externally, it's about community. It's about a better society, a better, fair, just society. And I think that's sometimes what you kind of see the split around. And I think that's what we have to start to really focus in on and and make a priority once again. A lot of organizations, and I think this is the same thing with reporting, right? Reporting forces you to focus on outcomes everything's numbers, everything's targets, and it takes away focus on impact. And impact is very difficult to measure. It cannot always be measured, but focusing purely on outcomes can still be counterproductive. So that's like my first bit. The second bit that I wanted to talk about today is what happens when there's an absence of just any sort of gender equity, gender equality, value recognition of women in the workplace. And that's what brought me to this whole situation with Crispin Odie. It's not like I'm not going to get into like the details of the whole situation, but it's just more taking a look at what happened from a different angle. So I'm going to share a little chart that I created. Hold on if I can get it up, but bear with me one second. It's a little bit small, I apologize. But for organizations who fail to really protect the women, the stages of risk, right? The stages of risk and the stages of accountability, and all of those look slightly different. And it starts with like managing your internal risk, i.e., what does your culture look like? How do you support women? How are women progressing within the organization? Do women in your organization feel both physically and psychologically safe, right? If you get that wrong, retention, retention issues, you're going to have, employee attrition issues, you're going to have retention issues, right? The next part of that is, um, your internal reputation quickly becomes your external reputation, right? So you can have all the nice stuff that you do on a marketing perspective, but slowly things start to leak out. They start to come out in the press. Somebody writes something on a social media point of view. And then it gets to this part of the noise is so much, it can't be ignored. And that's like an executive risk. So that could be shareholders, it could be a regulator. That's when people start to really look at the business and say, hey, I don't think this business is viable. I don't think this is the kind of business I want to be associated with for many reasons. So to highlight the situation with Odie Asset Management, or Crispin Odie, is that all of his sexual harassment cases or the stories have now come out. And this is sometimes why silence is complicit. And this is all about value recognition, right? And I'm going to be very careful about what I say, because you always have to err with caution with these things. But I want to look at it purely at an organizational perspective, right? So if somebody in general makes a complaint, if women make complaints of a certain nature, sexual, whether it's on a sexual basis or a racist basis, or experiencing racism or sexism, how that gets handled, how that's treated, the making a complaint, the follow-ups, the reporting where it needs to happen, when none of the right processes are in place. And it's not always just processes. It can sometimes be processes. It can also be people. You might have the processes in place, but if you have a person that is easy to convince, or who's happy to turn a blind eye because they are being pressured in one way or the other, it means that it doesn't provide the necessary safety. It means that women are not valued in general in the organization. And the more these things happen, at a certain point, there's always going to be one, what did they say, right? It's the straw that breaks the camel's back. There's always going to be one person who's going to say they've had enough. And it might not be that they go to the press. It might just be that they tell a friend, and that friend tells another friend. And you know how quickly things move from internal reputation to external reputation. Now, usually the part about the executive risk, that usually takes a little bit longer. But the point is that the follow through, moving from internal risk to external risk to executive risk, all of that will always happen. And this is why it becomes so important that organizations don't think that you can ignore, delay, turn a blind eye to significant issues within your business, because all of this is a matter of time. It is a matter of time before one goes into the other and goes into the next. The question is, are you willing to change that? Are you willing to really look, really interrogate what it is that you're trying to do and hold up the mirror to your organization and say, we have had this trend. The power of exit interviews. You know, does your organization have exit interviews? And what are the thematics of those? Are they the same things? Is it the same person? You know, there's always that kind of the conversations that happen just flippantly, but they tell you all that you need to know. At what point are they paid attention to? I will also, as I said, after this call, I will also share the links to more information on OD. I'll share some more links to the McKinsey reporting. I'll share links to the Experience Chasm survey, but and some other kind of resources. But the point is that when we get to external risk, when organizations get to this point where their reputation, where their stories have come out, I'm not saying it's too late to change, but it's a huge sign that there's something wrong with your governance. Because if you value the women within your organization, if you specifically value the Black women within your organization, it shouldn't take your reputation being tarnished externally for that to be the point of action. So it's all about managing the risk, i.e., embedding gender equity, interrogating processes, making sure your managers have the appropriate training. Do they understand? Do they understand that, it's not just about having a diverse panel, but making sure all the panelists are prepared, making sure that all the analysts are ready, not analysts, panelists are prepared, are ready for these interviews, making sure that, how are they making decisions? Even are they making decisions purely from the perspective of, oh yeah, let's come together and let's make collective decisions? Or is everybody going away really spending time with it? Because ultimately, to get to equity, it takes time. Now, I'm not saying it should take forever, but it takes time, and that should also be recognized. But this is an ongoing process. And in many ways, I mean, using the present participle of embedding is significant because it's a constant process. It's a constant measure and redefine, and really learning to meet the needs, just like with anything else, just like when you're whatever you manage, it's never static. It's always a constant process. And this is what this series is about. It's, spending time, and I will be spending time talking to industry experts about how have they gone through this process. How does gender equity affect or direct the work that they do? How is it that they've had to measure and redefine? What are they actually measuring? Because that's also a difficult one. It's very difficult to measure when you don't know what you're actually measuring. And I think this is one of the critical points for any organization. How do you what am I measuring, and how can I measure it, and then how do I redefine it? And this is where our huge, it's not really huge, but this is where I'm going to announce something that I'm very, very excited about. And we will be releasing our toolkit the next week, if I'm not mistaken. And that's going to be really looking at just aligning once again with the theme of this, which is, embedding gender equity in your organization. There's going to be some specifically for financial services, different parts of financial services, but then there's also just going to be a general organizational toolkit to look at different parts, whether it's layers of influence, looking at this accountability and risk part. And most importantly, looking at how can you measure, how can you create KPIs. And if anyone knows, like, I'm not a fan of KPIs at all, but at the same time, this is still a metric that everyone works with. So this is, how can you create meaningful KPIs that still match up with the equitable work, the equitable processes that you are putting in place. So I'm really, really excited about that. And once they're ready, I will announce that. on my LinkedIn page. And then what was the other one that I wanted? I'm just double checking. So yeah, so that's the big one. And then the other call out, shout out that I have is it's going to be our third year of the Experience Chasm Survey, and we want to do things a little bit differently. And if anybody, Black women across Europe, who want to be part of our roundtable series, please let me know. Either LinkedIn, send me a message, because we're looking to talk to founders. We're looking to talk to, it's a little within our survey, we found obviously it's women in the workplace, so there was a lot that was really tailored to employer employee lifestyle, but we also want to look at Black female founders just to have the same conversation around their workplace experiences and how that led them, and I'm also happy to share my story, how that led them to doing their own thing. So yes, we will be sending a call out. So if anybody wants to participate in our roundtable series, please also feel free to send an email to contact@benefactorconsulting.com. Yeah, and that's it. It's welcome. Thank you for welcoming me back. Thank you for taking the time. Today, the show is only half an hour because it's just me, but going forward, it will be me and guests. And hopefully next time you have questions, interactions, feel free to send requests beforehand. But yeah, thank you for taking the time. And I am very, very happy to be back. I'm very happy to share information. I'm really happy to kind of, be back. That's it. I'm happy to be back. So please feel free to comment, like, share, follow up, whatever you like. It's really good to hear your feedback. And if there's any more information you want, please also let me know. I'm happy. As I said, I'm going to share all the details, the links, so that everyone can kind of find the insights and research. Because I think, and thank you, Charlotte O'Leary, for this phrase, knowledge economy. The more we share with each other, the more we're in a better position to help each other. And this is also what this show is meant to be about: sharing expertise, sharing knowledge. And, I'm open to, so if there's things you want me to read, please send them along and recommend them. So just thank you very much for your time and have a wonderful day, what's left. Goodbye. Oops, I didn't press the button yet.